Good morning from Birmingham, and I'm hoping you're having a good morning in Nebraska. Apologies I haven't been able to be with you. I'm Alister Scott, and I'm delivering the first part of this talk about how we make better policies and decisions. So, what I want to do in my talk is focus on some research that we've been doing with the UK government and research councils. I want to take you through the assumptions that we're making, how we built our framework within which better policies and decisions can be made, give you a case study and then some lessons learned. The slide suggests that there's quite a lot of confusion and bewilderment about tools and about how we can improve policy and decision making. I hope to shed some clarity by the end of this talk. So our research is very much about getting people that are tied to their chairs to actually embrace new ways of thinking and to actually put it into action. And what we're doing with the National Ecosystem Assessment follow-on is translating the complex science of ecosystem services and ecosystem assessment into practical tools so that they can be applied at different scales across the UK. I'm one of 10 packages. I have 2 packages I'm running, 9 and 10, looking at building a tools framework and then implementing it. And the idea is that we use the ecosystem approach as core guidance within which tools are then subjected to an ecosystem services framework. And hey presto, like a rabbit out of a hat, policies and decisions improve. So before you all switch off, I suspect I need to take a step back and make some initial assumptions about you and possibly about the policy making process in general. So the first point is where each setting actually is unique, and the idea you can translate, make one-size-fits-all policies is fallacious. Many policy and decision-making processes fail to understand or build in, embed the environment. It's seen as an externality. It is not well used in these processes. So currently, policy and decision-making processes are not that fit for purpose. For people that are actually trying to make policies and decisions, there's a confusing range of tools actually out there. And I think the other bit is that the ecosystem approach, the terminology of ecosystem services I've been using, is not well understood or applied. I hope to shed some light on that. So, how do we go about building a better framework? There's a whole bunch of challenges out there. Firstly, that we as academics pose our research and translate it to policy and practice. The whole issue of our jargon, we are intoxicated by the eloquence of our own verbosity. The silos that we work in restrict changes. Beyond boundaries is very much the theme of your conference that's just passed. All the other points about time resources, our fix on economic growth, the conflicting demands, and the way that kind of concepts are sort of the next bandwagon, generally abstract, theoretical, problems of translating into practice, and very often bolt-ons. So these are the challenges that we established from interviewing. So our response, very quickly, is we work with practice and policy, and together using co-production to find those academic insights. Instead of jargon and language problems, we find the common language that unites rather than divides. We seek out transdisciplinary approaches, building new partnerships with policy and practice and academia, working together. We use co-production and co-financing to address issues of lack of resources. And instead of just a fix on economic growth, conservation, or community development, we use the ecosystem approach as a systemic holistic angle. Working with champions helps embed good ideas. Building partnerships is also another way of sharing and adaptive management. And hopefully that takes us to a better conclusion. So what is our conceptual framework? How do we build what we're looking for? Let's start with the 9 o'clock part, which is the cultural context, where the policy and plan or project is being conceived. There's a whole bunch of institutional and governance related issues that need to be understood about the place, about the policy context, and that is then feeding into some overarching guidance how that policy should be made. The ecosystem approach provides that, and what we're suggesting is that those principles then, if you like, are adapted into guidance, so they're translated into guidance, and then that guidance is targeted at specific stages in the policy cycle, from ideas to survey to plan, ideas to survey to assessment to plan to act and to evaluate. So that gives us a kind of a way forward, and then the tools that we currently use in policy, some of those we've selected and adapted using an ecosystem services framework, and then those tools are signposted at those stages. So let's unpack this a bit further with the ecosystem approach. 12 principles, very quickly going through. Societal choice, principle 1, issues of social justice and equity. 2 is about subsidiarity, where you get management decentralised to the lowest appropriate level. 3, adjacent effects of land management interventions. So thinking about what impact your intervention has upstream or downstream, using the water analogy. Boundaries do not recognise, if you like, natural areas do not recognise the administrative boundaries that we impose on ourselves. Managing land in an economic context, maintaining and enhanced ecosystem services has dominated the agenda of ecosystem science, and in many ways has hijacked the ecosystem approach. That is one principle. 6 is about identifying limits and thresholds and working within those. 7 is thinking about the appropriate spatial and temporal scale to manage land at, so not one fits on a particular idea, whether it be localism, regionalism. It is about the most appropriate level for managing that land. It's also recognising the time lags in terms of where you make an intervention. There are lag effects, a bit like an oil tanker. You turn the wheel, it doesn't turn for quite a while, and we need to think about the long term. Change to the best advantage. Land use needs to change. You cannot preserve it in aspect. The balance between use and conservation. And 11 and 12 are all about getting good information. And that's in terms of being consulting to get the local knowledge to inform policy from both experts and local people, and then involving all of the relevant sectors in that process. So ecosystem services, what we have here, principle 5, what I'm showing you there is the ecosystem services framework. And the idea of a framework is that you don't cherry pick ecosystem services. These are the services provided by nature. The categorisation that's there reflects the fourfold approach that's used now pretty much in the literature in the way that ecosystem services have been divvied up. The danger becomes if you cherry pick, you then have possibly unforeseen trade-off and perverse effects. Perhaps the most problematic ones are the supporting and cultural ones, which tend to be overlooked in favour of provisioning and regulating services. I think that's quite important to alert you to. So what we did within our particular research was to break down the tools out there. And we made an initial distinction between tools that help you make decisions, they provide intelligence to make good decisions, and tools that actually influence behaviour. Now, what we have here is the idea of decision support. So there is a process which enables a decision maker to have a better intelligence to make those decisions. So that list provides the kind of tools that we use. Cost-benefit analysis would be familiar to you. There is also multi-criteria decision analysis where you can't put physical values on things. There's also this idea of a process of assessing whether a plan, policy or programme is in keeping with the environment, strategic environmental assessment, for example. Invest is an ecosystem services tool, which is about mapping those ecosystem services to identify areas of strong or weak services. Influencing behaviour is about nudging, it's about changing the way people behave in terms of incentives. So you can induce people to change the way they behave, or you can regulate. And what we have here is the idea of taxes as a form of regulation. So green taxes are very politically sensitive in the UK at the moment because they've been seen to be responsible for a big hike in energy prices, but they're basically trying to encourage us to go for more green forms of energy, but we have to pay for those. Payment for ecosystem services and agri-environment schemes are more voluntary. They intend to be inducements that encourage people to pursue desired behaviour change. The question is whether they are actually merely responding to economic incentives or whether it actually does constitute a behaviour change. That vulnerability is an interesting issue. The bit about public engagement suggests that all tools should engage with the public. So this is what we've created. It's a website, a web portal, which puts all our research in one place. There's the policy cycle. I don't want to explain too much detail here because I haven't time. Suffice it to say that what we've done is we've taken the 12 principles of the ecosystem approach and used those in those specific stages of the policy cycle. So we're getting people to think about what should be done at each stage and then signposting the tools and alerting people to the case studies that they can consult in that respect. So, in particular, ideas and acts may be things that you don't normally see in a policy cycle. And we've put those in because stakeholders told us that often people go into policy plans and programmes with one option, and that's followed through, rather than investing in time and stakeholder views to get a range of options that you carry through. The act phase is important because quite often people delivering on the ground do not actually relate to the plan that's been devised. They don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity, or they just ignore the plan. So those two phases we put in specifically in response to our feedback. So what you've effectively then got is this breakdown of the 12 principles into meaningful guidance with tools signposted. So an example just to finish. This is a situation in Exmoor in Devon in the UK. And here we have a river catchment. And what we have is the River Exe as the main river running towards Exeter itself. And Exbridge is a pumping station that when water is running low, pump up to Wimbleball Reservoir, which is about 5 miles, lifting water 120 metres. Now that is quite a costly exercise, and South West Water recognised that there might be some advantages of paying farmers on Exmoor to re-wet their land up in the National Park moorland environment to actually keep water up there instead of watching it all flow downstream to have to be pumped up. And as a result of that, they used the existing agri-environment schemes to pay the higher level stewardship for that approach. However, this led to broader issues of benefit in terms of thinking about how, by managing the peatlands through reducing stocking and through other techniques, the moorland could be improved because it's being degraded by overgrazing and overburning. That would then lock up more carbon, so you're having a positive effect on carbon dioxide. You're also, by the re-wetting process, providing flood protection. So South West Water then entering into a payment for ecosystem services with the suppliers, the farmers and landowners. And this is like a virtuous circle, if you like, between the providers of the ecosystem services, the water companies and the consumers from the reservoir. So lessons learned. Mainstreaming ecosystem science is, through our 12 case studies, is incredibly different. There are different ways of doing it, reflecting the realities. I think there's a series of issues in order to get the best approach to mainstreaming this thinking. Firstly, it's not using the word ecosystem science. It's actually thinking about targeting your audience. And that engagement process needs to take place at the beginning to get the political buy-in. To do that, strong leadership is vital, and in all our case studies, we have observed that leadership, engaging with more sceptical audiences and overcoming that resistance to change, because change happens and we need to move away from silos to more systemic, holistic thinking, and that's going out of our comfort zones. We have to simplify the complex science that we're talking about, and I think one of the most obvious ways is by having good maps, showing, if you like, maybe right at the outset under a survey, the ecosystem services that exist. And we also, as a result of that, need to identify the hooks. Well, the first hook is obviously the policy cycle. The policy cycle from ideas to survey, to assess, to plan, to act, to evaluate, is something everybody's familiar with. Once then people understand how this works in, the hooks are designed for the audience. So we don't talk about ecosystem services. We talk about what matters. If it's business, it's risk. It's managing risk, it's producing multiple benefits. If it's planners, it's actually thinking about cooperation, various policy initiatives and policy documents that they have. So you need to suit the hooks to the audience. To finish, it's important that we capture good practice and not reinvent the wheel. I might be using different terms, but effectively we're dealing with the same wine. We're putting it in different bottles, but we need to think more systemic. And there's a lot of good practice out there, so let's not try and invent new ways, let's learn from what's working and apply it to the setting. The ecosystem approach is far more important as guidance than individual cherry picking of ecosystem services. Too much focus is on ecosystem services. There are 12 principles that need to be used, and we need to get out of our silos and comfort zone. And finally, the most important tool is you. People need to communicate, to listen, to respect, and to produce better policies and decisions as a result.